let's look at the hook and intro with a little bit more detailed lens. So I'm going to pull up that scope and sequence, and you can see here, our section is the lesson. We're doing an introduction to not FabuLingua just yet, just to the idea of the thematic unit of family. And I like to start with a hook before I ever even say what's going on. I have an activity, a game, a book, etc. And what I would do in this case is I would bring some family photos, and I would make sure that each person in the photo is engaged in some kind of activity. For example, my son playing the piano, or my dog in the river, or me eating Thai food, something that gives some content for the kids to talk about when we get to that moment. And remember, this is all about community building as well. And so those extra things, besides just a boring school portrait, would really help with that community bonding, as well as the language use that eventually happens. So after some fun presentation showing them, who each person is, I would allow kids to ask one question, and I would give the disclaimer that I might answer. I'd rather not share that information. And I would help them with some good responses to that. I could say, oh, I understand, or thanks anyway, or maybe later, because we're encouraging that they use the same language with each other. So after some questions and answers about my family photos, we would then play a game where kids walk into the hallway while or maybe I've asked another teacher or assistant or somebody to spread those photos around the room, and but in obvious places, they're not hidden. And then we come back, we sit in circle, and I would ask, who is on the math shelf? And, they would answer, your mother or your dog, or whoever it would be. Where is my son? In the library. And it, brings about lots of giggles and helps to, bring this language to life. Most of the language, depending on the age of your students, will be something they're already familiar with, but not always. And it's just keeping it very fresh, and a really, really fun way to bring up the idea of family. So I would also play this game in the future, just throwing this out there. Once they've been in the FabuLingua Rani Isapi Mi Familia story, once they've been doing that for a little while, I would bring this game back. And this allows them to, they've already got these concrete ideas of who these people are, and now they have some Spanish language, and we're putting it together in this way that they remember as fun. Once, I can tell it's time to push the game a little bit further, then we can use the game with other kids' photos with their permission, of course. So now we're branching out using even, different vocabulary than what I've provided. But again, that's in the future mini games, future vocabulary check-ins. So let's get back to the document and back to the hook and introduction. So after we play the game, then I would actually pause before I go on to this nonfiction versus fiction situation. And I would consider if your students have already been exposed to the idea of learning language. If they have not, then this would be the perfect time to let them know that you're going to be learning about the family vocabulary, all the words there is to learn about the family that we have. And we're going to be learning about it in Spanish as well. And then I would take the conversation down that path and bring up the fun of learning a different language, the importance of it, ask some kids who already know some Spanish, how they know the Spanish, and go down that path. If you're in a situation where the kids have already done, some type of Spanish learning, then that conversation wouldn't be necessary. And what I would go from there is we would talk very briefly to bring up the idea that we would have already covered previously about nonfiction versus fiction. We'd say my photos, my family photos are nonfiction materials because they're my real family. And that we are going to learn about a family that is fiction, a frog and a toad, some friends, Rani Isapi, and I would have a printout of a pond, either something that just looks like a pond, or from the resources that FabuLingua has available. And I would also have the printouts of Rani Sapi and the various characters, and I wouldn't worry about having the objects there yet, but having them available around so that you could say we're also going to learn about a fiction family, Rani, Isapi, and their families. So, so we're going to, at that point, introduce the theme of family. And at this point, you could decide how you want to introduce that. You can just, come out and say, this is what we're going to do. I personally would read the book, All Kinds of Families by Norma Simon, and it just, from the very beginning, introduces the idea that, families look different. Some are big, some are small, some, have this, some have that. And then after that, I would have them guess, what it is we're going to be learning about. And of course, at this point, they can throw out their family, the idea of the thematic unit as family, and really take ownership of it since they've guessed it. And I would also let them know that we're going to be making our very own family ponds. At this point, I'm just really putting out there enthusiastically. And instead of, some people make family trees, maybe I mentioned that, maybe I'm not, but we're going to, be bringing photos and doing drawings and making our own family ponds, which will be fiction because we don't live in ponds, but it will be nonfiction because it's our real families. I would, at this point, let them ask a few questions, or better yet, challenge them to make some guesses about either what that project's going to be like or about Rani Isapi and what that's like. And I really like leaving them with a little bit of suspense and wanting more. And then we would wrap up that hook introduction section. And then you'll see a little bit later in the very same day is when we would jump into the special projects.